Thank you for your patience, everyone. We will start shortly. We're just waiting for everyone to log in. Great. We're going to go ahead and begin. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Donna Meltzer, CEO of the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities, NACDD. I'm a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue shirt today with some white pearls around my neck. Behind me, you see a blurred vision of my home office. Thank you all for joining us today for this very special podcast as part of NACDD's Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month activities. Since 1987, NACDD and its sister DDAC programs, along with the Administration for Community Living, has been celebrating DDAM and using it as an opportunity to help many people learn more about intellectual and developmental disabilities, meet and hear from people who live with IDD, and hear voices of individuals who we may not hear from as often as we should. Today, NACDD is very excited to be partnering with the Black Feathers podcast, a project of the Administration for Community Living funded projects of national significance on state of the states and intellectual and developmental disabilities. For today's live podcast, which is also being recorded, we will hear from individuals from tribal nations with deep connections, both in their tribe as well as within the IDD community, through their State Council on Developmental Disabilities, or DD Council. This year's theme for DDAM is Beyond the Conversation, It's About Action. Today, we will learn about what is meaningful and important to our presenters about their intersectionality as a member of a tribal nation and as a person or family member of someone with IDD. And we will learn about actions that we can and should take to help all of us move forward with knowledge, value, and respect. Before I turn it over to those who are going to introduce our presenters today, I do have to give you a few housekeeping reminders. We are using Zoom webinar for our live recording of Black Feathers podcast today. For audience joining us today, sharing of video, audio, and chat is disabled. You may toggle on or off the live captioning today by pressing the CC button on the bottom of your screen. We are also providing American Sign Language interpreters. Soon, we will be launching a poll. You are encouraged to participate by pressing the button that corresponds with your answer. You may ask questions throughout our discussion today by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Those questions will be collected and asked at the end of the panel discussion. We will not be able to get to everyone's question, but we'll get to as many as possible as time allows. We are also recording today's episode of Black Feathers Live and streaming through YouTube to blackfeathers.org. Thank you all for being with us.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Crystal Hernandez. I'm a 42-year-old Cherokee woman with light skin, long medium brown hair, and dark eyes. I am wearing a black t-shirt with our Black Feathers podcast logo centered on it. It's a teal logo. I am sitting against a white background, and I am one of the co-hosts of the Black Feathers podcast and your facilitator for today. I would like to start with a quote. As we continue to make such massive and active strides to be seen and heard, it is only fitting to start today with this quote from a history-making and powerful Native woman. I have an obligation to honor the legacy that my ancestors gave me. I am ready to serve. United States Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland. We're going to start off with the poll, as was previously mentioned. This poll is an audience poll, and it'll be up through the end of the panelist introduction, which my co-host Shauna will take care of, to allow enough time for responses to be collected. Here is the poll. I will go ahead and read this. What are the most challenging barriers or issues you as a tribal citizen face or observe if an ally to tribal nations? There are selections such as employment, safety, coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19, mental health, access to healthcare, family support, direct support professionals, workforce shortage, displaced or disconnected from tribe, access to culturally rooted services, and transportation. I will turn it over to Shauna.
Halito, Sahujifiyat Shauna Humphreys. Hello, my name is Shauna Humphreys. I am a 4'11" lighter skinned Choctaw in my late 30s. I have long, dark brown or black hair, brown eyes. Typically, I have reading glasses. I didn't wear them today. And I have some freckles sprinkled across the bridge of my nose and cheeks. I am also wearing the Black Feathers t-shirt with a semi-blank office wall behind me. I am a wife, mom, mental health administrator, licensed professional counselor, and the co-host of Black Feathers podcast. We are honored today to have with us 4 amazing speakers. I will call on each one of them to introduce themselves. First, I have Ms. Sarah Young Bear Brown.
Hoat, everyone, which means hello in my language. My name is Sarah Young Bear Brown. I have dark skin with dark hair, black hair, and I am wearing some of my beadwork earrings and sitting in front of a green background. I have a black shirt on. I have a turquoise bracelet. And yeah, as I said, my name is Sarah Young Bear Brown, and I am so happy to be here with you all. I am a member of the Meskwaki Nation, which is here in Iowa. I'm a mother, an activist, an advocate for Indigenous deaf people in the community, and I have been doing that for several years. I'm also the chairperson for the Native American Caucus of the Iowa Democratic Party. And I am a deaf interpreter as well as an American Sign Language storyteller and various other hats that I wear, but I think that'll do it for now. So thank you all so much. And Katabi, which means thank you in my language.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we have Dr. Cheryl Funmaker.
I prefer to defer to my son, Cody Funmaker, first, as he's a person living with a developmental disability.
All right, we will have Cody.
Auchankarajda Hunchnachke ga Hingaidi, Maikadairajda Cody Funmaker ga Hingaidi. Hi, my name's Cody Funmaker, and my English name is Cody, as you can tell, and my Ho-Chunk name is Bear Heart. So yeah, and well, I'm in Edgewood College right now. I have black glasses and a black tracksuit, brown skin, and dark brown hair. And I'm a student at Edgewood College, and I'm part of the Cutting Edge program. And I am a student with this developmental disability needs, and um, and I am the son of Cheryl Funmaker as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Dr. Cheryl Funmaker, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. I am a Native American woman in her middle 50s with dark black hair in a bun, wearing cat eye glasses and my prized wampum necklaces with a lavender shirt. And very happy to be here.
Thank you. It's great to have you. And now we have Dr. Daryl Joseph.
Oh, Lamatauanasapti. It's a beautiful afternoon. My Hopi name is Scylla, which means breathing in the snow. My English name is Daryl Harmon Joseph. I represent the Ba'iswangwa clan, which is the water coyote clan from the village of Munkapi, place where the water flows, on the Hopi Nation located in northeastern Arizona. I am a middle-aged young Hopi man with long black hair, fixed in a braid. I am wearing dark rimmed glasses with this long sleeve light blue collared shirt and a turquoise necklace. I have an image of my home community of Munkapi behind me as my background in the early spring, showing a valley of budding cornfields scattered with peach trees throughout, and a small adobe style village to the mid right part of my screen. I am married and have 5 beautiful children. I'm a sibling to my older brother who has multiple disabilities, and to my younger sister, a son to my mother and father. My mother is a retired special ed teacher and has had a great influence on my career, as I was a former special ed teacher and administrator in K-12 education systems. And I'm currently serving in the role of an assistant professor of educational specialties in special ed in the College of Education at Northern Arizona University. Thank you for the invitation to be here today.
It is an honor to have you all. I'm going to turn it back over to Crystal for the poll results.
Fabulous. It was wonderful to hear all of your introductions. So I'm looking for the poll results now. I don't see them, sorry. While we're waiting for those to pop up, I'm going to go ahead and start moving on if that's okay. Black Feathers Podcast is a composition of guests with such incredible stories about disability and their tribal nations. We know the significance of storytelling for our people and that there is no exact translation for disability among our various tribal nations. I am very interested in hearing more about the stories from our panelists today and the journey that they have walked and are walking. And before I turn it over and start calling on our panelists, I do see the poll results that I would like to share. So of the items that have been listed, I do see that we are having a pretty strong representation in regards to culturally appropriate services or supports as being one of the most significant challenging barriers facing the attendees. And so we're seeing that at about 38%, followed by, I would say, mental health at 17%, which is pretty significant, followed by access to healthcare at 10%, employment at 8%, direct service professional workforce shortage at 8%, family support at 8%, and then followed by the remaining items, safety, displaced, disconnected from tribe, as well as COVID-19. So thank you for participating in that panel, or that poll, sorry. So going back to the question about storytelling and how it is impacting your journey, I would like to go ahead and call on our first panelist to discuss the journey and the impact of storytelling, and that would be Sarah.
Thank you so much for asking this question. I do believe storytelling is vital for us, for all of us folks who may lack information. And one of the ways that we can get information is to be able to share our stories with each other and to hear each other's stories. Sorry, my daughter needs something. Mom's in a meeting right now, okay? But as I was saying, I think that seeing more people with disabilities, more people who are Native folks sharing their stories over the years, I think that what we have a lack of is a record of those stories. Oftentimes they're hidden or not focused on as much, but they're so critical so that we can share what we've been through, what our experiences are. So for me, for example, using American Sign Language as I was growing up, when I was first born, everyone in my family could hear. Nobody knew sign language. Nobody knew any other deaf folks in our family. So when I was 8 months old and my family found out that I was deaf, they all learned sign language so that they could all communicate with me. So I learned sign language along with my family. And when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my parents were making the decision about where to send me for school. We were a very tight-knit community, and it was a very difficult decision for my parents to send me to a school for the deaf, which is several hours away. Everyone at the school was white. I live here in Iowa, so the population is predominantly white here. And at Iowa School for the Deaf, all of my peers, the other students, as well as all of the staff were white, and everyone was using sign language. So it was a culture shock for me to see an entire school, an entire community of people using sign language. And I still felt that isolation because my family was 4 hours away. My cultural tribal community was away from where I was, and they just didn't have the educational resources for educating a deaf student the way that the School for the Deaf did. So I had this navigation between the different communities that make up my identity. I was grateful to go to a school for the deaf because I had access to language and I could develop my identity as a deaf person. And I really did truly love my experience there. It was a home away from home, although it was several hours from my tribal community. And I was there for the entirety of my education, and I had many wonderful experiences. So I am thankful to the teachers and staff there who did a wonderful job of connecting me with my deaf heritage, regardless of my race or skin color. And so I think that that was very positive experience for me, which sometimes I think they kind of thought of me as a teacher's pet a little bit, but I did miss out on the cultural aspects of my Meskwaki community because I had to be separated from that. So I missed out on some of those traditions, storytelling that would have taught me about my my heritage. I wasn't able to participate in feasts or in worship and ceremonies that the rest of my family were. So I'm thankful that my parents made that decision to send me, and I learned a lot about my deaf identity through the stories that were shared with me at the School for the Deaf. And then later in life and during my times when I would visit home, I would learn about my Native history and heritage and culture through the stories of those members of my community and my family because they learned sign language and communicate with me. So there were pros and cons to all of the different options that could have gone through, and I learned a lot through the stories of the people around me. And now I'm able to tell my story and my journey of how I became the person that I am. And the experiences I've had with marginalization, with isolation, with neglect, or not being included. So for example, I wanted to go to a powwow and the council decided to not provide a sign language interpreter for me. So I wasn't able to access that, which is a very important part of being a member of my community. And they said that they didn't have it in the budget, which I knew that they did, and I knew that it was their responsibility to provide access for members of our community who are disabled and have disabilities. So learning how to advocate for myself in the various parts of my life and places that I go, learning how to speak out and going to different rallies and becoming an activist and building those skills and strengthening those muscles. It wasn't something that I felt like I could just sit back and do nothing about because I had seen members of my communities experiencing similar things. And having real world and lived experience. And so I knew that I had to take those experiences that I had and the stories that other people had told me and that I had seen and continue to share them with other people, because that's where I had gained my power. I had gained empowerment as a disabled person, as a Native woman, as a parent. All of those different things came from the stories that we share with each other and the stories that we gain as we live. So I think that that storytelling aspect is just absolutely crucial.
Thank you, Sarah. That was extremely powerful. I would like to ask Cody Funmaker if you can answer the same question about storytelling and telling your story and how you have kind of navigated through that and the power of it.
I guess I'll just kind of talk about my life. I guess how I experienced disability, like through social interaction. It started like in the elementary. I guess I thought like as myself as everyone else, but I did notice that sometimes I'd be separated from the other kids and stuff like that. And I always thought that was a little weird at the time. And I remember as time went on to middle school, I started to get a little bit embarrassed about getting the help. It was just kind of like, it's like, well, why am I like not as great as these other kids? Or like, well, how come they don't need help or anything like that? And I remember in kind of in like the Western society, it's pretty much we're independent society. And so like it's in that what I mean is that like it's very much a dog eat dog world, and it's very much it's a bit selfish and stuff like that. And so if you like in the eyes of that, like you'd be kind of seen as weak and stuff like that. And I remember I was kind of feeling ashamed of getting help, because like because I thought like, oh, like that kind of just shows how like dumb you are and stuff like that. And it's like I remember I didn't want to feel like that. So I started rejecting help from others and stuff like that. I tried to make myself seem normal and stuff like that. And so I didn't accept any help. And I also rejected my Native heritage, because it was always seen as uncool and stuff like that. I'd see other kids making fun of it. And I remember being embarrassed about it. So I remember not wanting to take part of anything. And it just, it was very hurtful. And so I guess once high school started hitting around, I was still very much in that hurtful thinking and stuff like that. And so what happened was like my parents told me about the Ho Chunk teaching that like, no, no, like you are like everyone else, but you just need a little bit more help. That's it. Like you're not lesser than everyone else, and you're just like everyone else, and you can still contribute. And I remember it took me a little bit to get that to my head, because I'd say it's very hard to get that out of your head, like being like, oh, I'm equal. I'm it's very much like I'm still working through that to this day. And so I'm still trying to work on that. But also, I guess like after graduation, I went to Project Search and well, actually, sorry. During high school, like at the end of high school, I remember thinking, oh yeah, I'm not gonna get into college because I had low ACT scores. And I remember one of the advisors told me, well, like colleges aren't really going to help you out with your accommodations and stuff like that. So you're not going to get help. And I knew at the time I needed help and stuff like that. I'm like, I'm immediately not going to get into college now because I didn't think there was a place for me in it at all. So after college, I went to work, work at Project Search in Kalahari, which is a program here in Wisconsin that helps kids with disabilities to do internships and stuff like that. And so I worked at the bakery over there. And so once the pandemic hit, I couldn't really do anything, everything is quarantined and stuff like that. And so I remember my mother was like, there's this program called Cutting Edge. And I did remember hearing it in high school. And I'm like, sure, why not? It was just completely out of boredom, and I just wanted to do something. And so there's only 4 or 5 spots with 50 people fighting for those spots and stuff like that. So it's kind of competitive. And so I guess I got in. I didn't think I was gonna get in because it was a long shot. And I remember asking one of the cutting edge program, one of the workers. I'm like, so was there any other native student on that got in? They're like, no, you were the first. I'm like, oh, I didn't expect that because you'd think it'd get some native students, but apparently I was the first one to get in at the time. And I remember thinking, oh boy, it's a bit of I kind of have to be a model now, represent my tribe and stuff like that. But I remember my mother telling me that no, you shouldn't have to do that. And you're there for yourself. You're not there for anyone else and stuff like that. You're there to accomplish your goals. And so that's what I'm trying to focus on. And my goal is to become a social worker. So I'm in I'm degree seeking in sociology. Otherwise, and I'm a junior at college, so I'm getting close. So I'm really hoping.
That's fantastic, Cody.
Yeah.
Your story is fantastic. Thank you so much for honoring us and sharing that. And one of many, I hope, first, things that you do in your life, just we have to keep pushing through and keep being the first and then open the door for everyone else. So thank you for sharing. Sarah, thank you for sharing that as well. The significance of storytelling is so powerful when we hear about the things that are important and we get in spaces and places that we were never allowed before. So thank you. Shauna?
Yes, thank you both for sharing your story. And like Crystal said, storytelling is just such a big part of our tribal communities. And we used it a lot to teach history, but also to learn. And so you two being brave and sharing your stories is helping us to learn and hopefully to take action. And I like what Cody said about representation. So the next question, it kind of really ties in, and it's representation is such a critical element for our people, as we are often an afterthought or simply excluded from the conversations. So what are the unique experiences that you have had where you have felt empowered and listened to? What do you feel are some barriers? And we have Dr. Funmaker up first to answer that question.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I wanted to just before I answer the question, mention very briefly that I appreciate this particular podcast because representation and the voice of historically marginalized communities like our American Indian community possesses a lot of potential to address systemic barriers, and then also promote positive systems change that we have run across quite often. So I'd like to say that as far as representation, one of the things that I've noticed is that when I participate across agencies and State Department programming, as I've done that as a professional, but also as a family member. So I have a dual lens. I have a doctorate in special education from UW-Madison. And so I'm able to leverage a lot of that work within the field of disability. And then also try to leverage and promote our cultural teachings, because as tribal people, we all know that we come from beautiful cultures, very old teachings, complex cultural practices that we want to reassert and pass along for our future generations. And so, and doing that is hard when we have little to no representation. So, so I encourage people to participate as family members or as individuals. And also, if you need to participate and represent with your relatives, go with a mentor or somebody within your community to participate. There's a lot of opportunities out there to advocate for our loved ones with disabilities. And anyway, in those capacities, when I've worked with agencies, I would say that what's empowering for our intent and purpose, which is to foster our young people, our future, is it's very apparent when we collaborate with other agencies like, you know, the State Education Agency or the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, whether these systems are open to an equity agenda. And when it's apparent that a system or an agency is open to that, that's very empowering and encouraging to try to address some of the disparities that exist out there for our people. So, so I'd say that the climate of the collaborative agency that you are working with is very empowering. And then also the willingness of these agencies to promote authentic relationships, not just, you know, show up once a year and then that's it. You know, that's Indian people. We come from tight-knit communities. We're often all related to each other. We know each other. We know our family histories. And these are the kind of relationships that we're used to in all our areas of life, actually. So that's a cultural difference. And I don't know that outside agencies always understand that. But anyway, so I'd say that, you know, the barriers sometimes that you run across, it's nothing new. And that would be the climate of the particular entity that you're trying to work with. And so, you know, somebody that's, or some agency that's unwilling to change or rock the boat by addressing equity and disparities. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Funmaker. Dr. Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you to both Sarah and Cody and Cheryl for sharing your perspectives. I mean, you know, storying, I think, is just so empowering. And as I was listening to everyone, all these stories of my experiences over time were just rushing through the floodgates and, you know, thinking, I should say this, I should say that. But I want to focus on my experience with, you know, my brother who has multiple disabilities, who is deaf. and has a very same experience as Sarah. But from being in the position as a younger sibling, a younger brother, I was in primary school. My mother was a teacher at the elementary school where my brother was currently enrolled, and this was on the Navajo reservation, and the Hopi Res was just south located south of the school. But in primary school, you don't really know much about what is going on. And during that time, my mother was really engaged with some difficult decisions related to some of the things that were shared in Cody's and Sarah's story related to separation, thinking about the roles of family and influence on siblings, the role of culture, thinking about outcomes in terms of the quality of life. And I think, as we think about the quality of life, we think about that in terms of systems, in terms of what Cheryl was sharing. And so my mother was going through this in the early 80s. And if you think about it, in special education for the special ed law, IDEA law, that law just was recently passed in 1975, right? And here was my brother who was needing resources in a rural community. And my mother was faced with the choice of making a decision about the best placement for life course outcomes for my brother. And it was very difficult for her to make the decision that he would also attend the Arizona State School for the Deaf and Blind, which is about 4 or 5 hours away from where we were at the time. And so thinking about that, I think about representation because a few things, I think we've made some progressions over time in terms of training some of our own community members to pursue education, much like the story of Cody. Congratulations, Cody, on pursuing that social work degree. So proud of you. But to train our own community members to pursue a degree in these specialized fields and then to return home. We see such a turnaround in the representation of Native American educators within our own schools. When I think about providing services through IDEA law, we still have work to do in the respects of training occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists, ASL interpreters, and educators to return home and do some of this work. So when I think about representation, those are the stories I think we need to continue to tell, much in the same way that Sarah had indicated that oftentimes the space for sharing that voice is not created. Right. And so how do we go about advocating to create opportunities for those stories to be shared, for those voices to be heard? And I think in that respect, we have much opportunity through the use of technology. I think this podcast is a great example of that in respects of how do we access a greater population of our community to create the voice and advocacy needed to improve the systems that we're working within. And then I think the other piece that, I really was thinking about is when I was a special ed administrator, I worked a lot with our students who were transitioning out of the high school from a rural community. And we created so many partnerships within the community and outside bordering town communities with colleges, community colleges, employers, residential facilities in terms of apartment living, home living. And, I learned a very important lesson at that time, that I was a Hopi member from my own community, creating services framed through the definition of transition outcomes through employment, training, and education, right? And independent living. And what I did at that time in my experience was I used this model that didn't really facilitate a strength-based approach from an Indigenous lens, from a Hopi lens. And I learned that in a harsh way by a grandmother telling me that she did not want to receive any of the programming we had developed, but instead wanted our program through an IEP to help her granddaughter, who she was the guardian of, to be trained as the village firekeeper of her village clan home. And I had to stop and think about that, really think about that. And I realized that when I think about employment, we had a cultural economy that was very strong and still exists in Hopi. And that covered the check mark of employment through ideal law. Independent living, she was going to be given her village clan home. That covered that check mark. And then education and training. She was going to receive lifelong training through a support system of the community to engage in this role and responsibility in a cultural context. So those three outcomes were covered. And I did not stop to think about that until that day. And guess what I did? I went to the computer. I started looking up what's the accessible resources? What are the articles that talk about culturally responsive programming for transition? And I found zero. Maybe a few articles on related topics, but not specifically on transition and special ed. And so as we think about systems, there were those stories related to my experience with my brother Garrett, who I think is joining with us tonight. So hello, Vava. And the experiences of going through these systems that inform the idea that representation is a critical element for our people, right? And these unique experiences are important for us to create this empowerment and create opportunities to be listened to address some of the barriers that were already presented. So I think those are some very powerful ideas that the previous presenters had really brought to mind. So thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you both for sharing. I'm now going to hand it over to Crystal for the next question.
So I really enjoyed listening to everyone, and I also serve in a dual role. My child is living with autism and kind of navigating the autistic journey. And so listening to all of you share, it's just been really emotional for me, to be honest. The future is great. Representation definitely matters, and our folks have a thriving gift to give to the world. So thank you. Thank you, Cody, and thank you, Sarah. All right. So I know that some of you have experiences and membership in your local DD councils, and we've talked about that a little bit today. And I would love to hear more about this role for those that do serve. What are some potential ways our audience can get involved with their local DD councils? Specifically representation, right? We want our folks in the rooms at the tables discussing the meaningful things and the meaningful ways that we can serve our tribal nations and the folks walking these journeys. So just curious, those that do have that experience, could you discuss any activities and projects and kind of your general experience? I know Dr. Funmaker, you are on a DD council. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm on the Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities. I believe this may be my second or third year, and I really enjoy being on the board for a variety of reasons, but the primary reason that I participate is because this is an opportunity for through my participation, I advocate for equity, but I also advocate for cultural responsivity. And also I advocate for culture, the reassertion of our cultural teachings regarding disability, having to do with inclusion and getting rid of the stigma of disability. So I think that, so I think that anybody that can give voice at board meetings or projects, apply for projects through the board is very important. And so what I've been able to do is advocate for equity on the state plan and on their committees through the board. And probably a little more than they would like sometimes, but I will keep at it as long as I have breath. So, and then also, I'm able to share with board members and staff the on-the-ground needs and issues of our particular communities and the lived reality of having a disability and living, on tribal land or in a rural area. And also my tribe, we serve our urban people as well. And so I really try to advocate for cultural responsibility and in the program. So some examples of the projects that, can benefit tribal communities. And I believe some of these may be national opportunities. Each state will have its own board. And so everyone should know that, in a tribal community that their state will have a board for people with developmental disabilities. And so that opportunity to connect with that agency is there. And so some of the projects that we've had are partners with business, and that's employment training for people with disabilities, and then partners in policymaking, and that's parent and self-advocacy training. A youth leadership forum, and Cody has humored me, and he and I and his father and his brother, we've attended many of these different opportunities. He says that he's my guinea pig, but that's not true because I'm the guinea pig too. No, just kidding. So anyway, so there's all these opportunities out there to help our tribal people to get programs or to apply for programs or to receive some services and receive training for self-advocacy. We also have families supporting families, and that's one of the more effective collaborative strategies out there is for BPD to collaborate with other state agencies. So our board collaborates with the Department of Public Instruction, and they have been able to teach families and communities and promote family engagement. And so we really need that from our tribal communities. There's a power when we can band together and share our stories with each other, but also to outside agencies. And so we're in desperate need of that, more of that. And then, so one of the other things we do is we've collaborated with education, the board, and a local nonprofit agency that serves people with disabilities out of Madison called Love Inc. And we have these ground up family events for our tribal families, and they're wonderful. And we incorporate our cultural practices within that and make it culturally responsive. And so there's a definite potential to develop culturally responsive programming. And I want to say that this is very important because as I stated, Cody and I and our family have engaged in many of these different trainings that are out there. And there have been times where we perhaps have, we did experience some racial microaggressions. And so, we have to acknowledge that can happen. And so when that happens to us and we're not strong advocates, and it's, that's a very hard thing to cope with, having a culturally responsive event to kind of strengthen yourself and your teachings, and not having to deal with that component is very necessary. And so I'm very grateful, just that we've had this opportunity with our state board, and these collaborations amongst agencies like the Department of Education, Instruction, and to do these kinds of culturally responsive events. And we also are going to expand, I believe, our reach, because like I said, there's power amongst us, developing our own immediate community, but also banding together with the other tribes. So in Wisconsin, we've got 11 tribes. And so the power of us as a group, that's the ideal. And I know that there's many states where that can also occur, and we can make our amplify the voices of our people with disabilities.
Thank you so much. It echoes very loudly for me. I talk about that often too. Our voices collectively, there's nothing like it. We can be loud and we can get, those opportunities, get in the rooms where decisions are being made and have our voice really heard. Not this one time you come, they check the box, they have representation for this one meeting, but being an active participant, an active partner in decision making and formulating things that, need to change. Things need to change. We try to do a lot of this and it just doesn't work if it's not sincere. Sarah, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I also want to mention, I think it's important to mention allyship. I think that if we do all of this stuff, it's going to be very impactful, but without the extra support from allies who are willing to get involved, that's just going to make things so much double and triple our efforts. And for example, in the Meskwaki tribe, I have asked a lot of times for accommodations, and sometimes let me take a step back. What I'm seeing is that oftentimes the culture will talk about how people with disabilities are viewed as equals within our tribal communities. But then when it comes down to the practicality of it, it's not true, because we aren't always given accessibility or the things that we need within our communities, because we do need to have that increased education and those realities of things, knowing what people with disabilities need and listening to the frustrations of the folks who have the disabilities and what it is that what they need and how they're trying to navigate and participate, and look within our own tribes and say, where's the representation of people with different disabilities within our tribes, and what are we doing to make sure that we're being inclusive? And when we look around at wellness and mental health and the focus on community, but we don't see people with disabilities represented, then I think that points to how important it is for us to look within, like, for example, Wisconsin. I looked at the website there, and I think that, that is a great example, but we also need to just continually be looking for those opportunities. And this, as a deaf person, I've noticed that a lot of times I'm left out of participating in different things, because 90% of deaf people are born to families that no one else is deaf and nobody knows sign language, which means that we're born into communities where people don't know sign language either. And now that I'm a parent of 2 children, one of my children is deaf and one of my children is hearing. My partner is deaf as well. So we have 3 deaf members in our immediate household and then 1 hearing person. And our concern is that here within our household, we have full accessibility with each other. My son, who can hear, goes to school and he uses spoken language as well. But the variety of experiences within our communities is something that is so diverse. And I think that it's not just the Meskwaki tribe, but I'm speaking from that experience because that's my community. But I also just want to extend the appreciation for the allies who are out there practicing allyship, because that's very important as well.
Thank you so much for saying that. I completely agree. And if we're talking about disabilities, and we're not talking about it in a space that is inclusive, like the DEI efforts and those types of things that we see, if we're not including disability, we're not doing it right. So thank you for sharing that. Shauna?
Yes, so we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about representation, and data and information gathering and sharing is also critical, and in a way tells the story of our tribal communities. So, what do you see as some opportunities to assist in getting better and more representative data from tribal citizens and tribal nations? Dr. Funmaker.
Dr. Funmaker, you're muted.
Well, that would help, wouldn't it? Thank you. So I just wanted to begin and just say that data is critical because we need it to advance an equity agenda. And the needs of our disability populations are nuanced and complex. And so tribal nations, as well as agencies, need a really strong idea of who the population is and what their needs are. And so depending who's also on this presentation, getting accurate numbers for American Indian communities is quite difficult and quite often inaccurate. So, so getting data is very important, and we have federal ways, data sets that we can access and state numbers and things like that. But also, there's a potential for tribes to provide localized numbers to enhance their collaborations with like school districts, for example. So I think that if we have outside agencies that they can reach out in a proactive way to and hook up to like tribal initiatives and programming that exist already. And that would be like education departments, the health systems, social services, and trying to locate key people in those departments. Also, locating statewide tribal agencies. In Wisconsin, we have the Great Lakes Intertribal Council, Folk Rehab for Native Americans, the Wisconsin Indian Education Association. I think moving across systems is the key for collaboration. And also, our tribe generates data. And so what we know precisely where all of our children are, perhaps even better than the state agencies do. And so as far as data, if we have a tribe education or ADRC, we can try to maintain our own data and work with our school districts. If we know that we've got 5 kids with developmental disability, we want to hit them up with waiver, a system to enroll in waiver programs or participate in training opportunities. So I think that just because of the faulty data that's it's well documented, it's hard to track our needs. That tribes, if they're in a position to, and hopefully they would be, can start to track that kind of information and try to enter into partnerships with these outside entities. So.
Thank you, Dr. Funmaker. Dr. Joseph?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Funmaker, for sharing that. And I agree completely. I think, one of the things that I'm seeing there are many entities at a micro and macro level that collect data in many different ways, right? And so I think one of the things we have to understand is that, but idealistically, you don't want to create a new system, right? If the data is already being collected, it's a matter of how do you create opportunities to negotiate partner sharing, data sharing across these systems, and align, the process and how we serve that. And I think that's particularly important, especially for our ED community, because Darryl pointed out something very important. In our in my community of Hopi right now, I'm engaged in a project that is looking at supporting the resilience of mental health for Indigenous youth in our communities. And one of the things that we're learning, and I'm going to assume and make the assumption that I'm sure this is very similar in other tribal communities, that when we talk about something so important about mental health, and going back to the poll results, I think that was one of the highest represented categories, that mental health is important for this population, that there is no streamlined way that supports a process that facilitates services around the services of mental health for youth. And so when we talk about representation, intersectionality, lack of access, particularly for the DD field, then that's going to be twofold, threefold of an issue, right? And so what we're learning in our community is that we need to find ways that we take our school systems, who are collecting these data through discipline referrals, to the healthcare system, to social services. We need to gather social services departments and think about how they're receiving information, what from that information can be shared. How is the behavioral health center, the health services departments from our community working with that? And then what is the role of youth organizations, right? And so currently, when we talk about systems, the challenge is that we are not always aligning very well how to share data that facilitates a support mechanism for youth. So much so that we're being able to track to see what they're receiving in one program, like the educational field, and how that's a continuation of services in the other organizations. And so when we think about families and individuals with developmental disabilities, I think that's a really challenging circumstance that we have. And then, the other component I think is really important, which Cheryl mentioned, was this idea that we have over 570 plus federally recognized tribes, right? And every tribe has a unique sovereign political status. And so in our communities, we're talking a lot about data sovereignty. Who has ownership over data, right? And how do we control for that? And so when you're working in systems, I'll just use education, for example, there are some communities that have both BIE funded schools, have schools that are grant contract, tribally operated schools. You have schools that are publicly funded schools. And so when you have schools that are structured around three funding mechanisms, you're already probably at a disparity when we're talking about sharing data, right? And when we talk about inequity or receiving equitable services for this population of students, then we're probably going to find some differences, right? Across that population, even though they're being serviced within the school, same community. And so I think as we speak about data, information gathering, that we need to find ways to, as Sarah said, create allyship with these organizations and find ways that facilitate a support mechanism for our youth, particularly when we're focused on what that life course trajectory is, right? From the very beginning, early childhood education years to adult outcomes, right? What does that mean when we're talking about residential programs, employment programs, training and education? And so, those are some things that I think DD councils can do a great job with. Black Feathers Live podcast, I mean, you're hitting it on the mark in terms of thinking about using these stories to facilitate that conversation. And so those are just, I think, some experiences that I've seen in regards to that. And then when you think about university systems, then you have the Sonoran USED, the university USED, right? Across our nations, and I think there's like 20 plus Tucson out of the Sonoran USED, they have the Native Center for Disability, where Christy Kelly is the director, that just started up. So they're promoting conversations around all topics. We have the National Technical Assistance for Tribal Vocational Rehabilitation, the AVERTAC Center, who is partnering with the TVR Institute, with the IHD at Northern Arizona University. So there are these hubs, they're there. So how can we find a meaningful way to collaborate across these systems? I think is really important when we talk about looking at data and the ownership of that and facilitating services for this population. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I'm now going to turn it over to Chris.
So yes, there's a tremendous amount of work going on. I just want to clarify one point. 67 USEDs, including Kansas University CDD. So thank you for sharing. There's tremendous amount of work going on in this space. So just briefly, I'm keeping an eye on our time, and I know that we have a lot to share. So I'm just going to call maybe on one or two of you for this next question and just keep it maybe quite short. We've talked a lot about this already when each of you shared your stories. We know about historical trauma in our tribal nations and among our citizens, but I also see a double trauma for tribal citizens and those with disabilities. And so I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. And I know that it's come up in a couple stories. So maybe Sarah, if you can start us off on that.
Sure. So I remember when I was young and different times as I was growing up when I would ask for an interpreter and would be told no and would be denied, even though I was a tribal member. And I would want to participate in different events. I felt very left out. So having to rely on my family as other members of the community who knew sign language to interpret for me, but then that they were not able to participate. And so I felt that I lost a lot of that connection to my tribal community because I wasn't able to participate in that way. Later, as I got older, I was able to advocate and try and change things within my community, but that was a lot of extra work for me to have to take on. And also being aware that not all deaf people are the same and not all deaf people have the same needs. And each of us as an individual will know best what we need and how we can participate. For those of us that use American Sign Language and use interpreters, the reason why we do that first and use written language second, so for example, captioning or some kind of other written way, is that American Sign Language is often our first language. So for me, English is not my first language, is not my native language. And so being able to express myself in a full and complete way and bring my most authentic self to my communication works for me best in American Sign Language and not in writing. And I'm not very skilled with writing out comments, but if I'm able to express myself in sign language and have an interpreter who can understand both American Sign Language and the spoken language of the people around me and can facilitate that communication, then I can bring my more complete self. And then I also can educate the people around me about what I need and how to work with me as a deaf person, how to communicate with me, and to not have that access really deprives you of language, deprives you of connection, and it creates an extra stress and struggle for many years over my lifetime that other folks in my own tribe have not had to deal with. So my disability adds that extra layer, and also the toll that it takes on you to be denied over and over again. I'd often wanted to participate in powwows with my family, and the council should provide me with an interpreter for that access. And I had to ask repeatedly and was told many, many times that I couldn't do that. And then another example was the governor of our state of Iowa had invited me to come to the state house and meet with her. And I had to do the work of finding an interpreter because they also weren't aware that it was their responsibility to provide access for me. So I would say that, of my over 30 years of life of trying to take on that extra toll of advocating for myself, not only as a Meskwaki woman, but as a deaf woman, and having to do that double work and the toll that it takes on my own well-being. I can also remember times in the past when I felt frustrated because uh, I had struggled with alcoholism and I wanted to participate in some resources for that. And a lot of those places would not provide me a sign language interpreter. They told me that if I wanted to do that, I would have to participate through Facebook Messenger. So not only is that unprofessional, it's not access. And I'm not able to express myself. I had to be passive and just sit and watch and not participate and type out into English if I wanted to respond. So that is some frustration where we don't have access to things as members of Native tribes, and we don't have access to things as members of the disability community. So learning how to advocate to people and finding resources where people understand me as a deaf person and understand me as a member of the Meskwaki Nation, it's just difficult. It's that extra layer that we have to deal with, and it's exhausting. And there are many, many barriers that we face as individuals that only we really truly know how often we've had to do that, and the accumulation of our years of experiences with that. That brings us back to why the stories are so important, because I can share all of those experiences that I have, even though I still have a lot of work to go ahead of me. Those stories, I mean, it's sort of like we just need to keep educating people. We need to keep advocating and keep dealing with it. To be honest, if I'm being very straightforward, it's something that I don't think is going to be resolved in my lifetime, and it consumes a lot of my daily energy and my daily effort. But now that I have a deaf child, I'm not only doing it for myself, I'm doing it for her as well, and doing it for the other people that I know who are also in this fight, but who also get tired. And there's enough for all of us to be continually doing. And I know that my daughter will have to do that, but I can model for her and other deaf children who are in our lives, and other Indigenous children who are in our lives, who we cherish and we want to succeed, and we want them to thrive, and we want them to have fewer barriers and have to do less work than we're all doing. And that's part of why we do this, is so that they can have better access, and also to model to them how to do that ongoing self-advocacy. And like you said, it's just something that we have to keep going.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question, and then I'm going to kick that one off with Cody. So this year's theme around DDAM is beyond the conversation. How can we, after hearing all the insights and stories today, come together and weave a call to action that is beyond the conversation? So Cody, can you go ahead and answer that for us? What are your thoughts? How can we take this beyond just talking about it?
How can we take this beyond this? Um, let's see. I guess how can we take action? I guess how me and my mother did it was like, I guess like I didn't really know anything about anything. And so my mom had to go through all the trouble of just figuring out what to do for me and stuff like that. And like she told me a lot of the times it was pretty hard because like we because a lot of the times like parents aren't told what to do with children with disabilities and stuff like that, and like they kind of had to do it like the hard way and stuff like that because they didn't have anyone else to model after and stuff like that. So I guess how my mother did it was that like she was learning about disability in school and stuff like that, and while I was still in like like K through 12, I was in that, so we both kind of had to learn stuff like that. And so my mom created that program with Love Inc. Yeah, thanks Stephanie. I know you're in the audience, but like but yeah, yeah, my mother and Living created a program for those families and stuff like that because we knew that families needed that and stuff like that, and we kind of wanted to create something for those families because we don't have because like I'm guessing like a lot of people don't know about this stuff, and yet like we just had to do it ourselves. We kind of had to create something for ourselves. And so I'm very proud of my mother for doing that for me. She learned a lot and stuff like that. And I'd, I'd, I'd like to say that I'm very proud to be her son and stuff like that. So, wa igiginapchna, hiuni.
Thank you, Cody, for sharing that. You're absolutely correct. Education is a huge component. A lot of people don't know about this or they make assumptions about all things. And, those with lived experience walking the journey definitely are the biggest teachers. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Funmaker, any last words?
With regards to the question,
Yes,
So,
call to
yeah.
action.
yeah. So I think that promoting the trying to address the stigma around disability is something that I have really taken away from Cody's story and living with him all these years. And I hadn't realized at what a young age our children with disabilities come across the stigma and the ableism. So I think you can do that through curriculum reform or initiatives. You can do it from your tribe to reassert our tribal teachings around disability, that we are all, level, except for our veterans and elders. They're above us. So, but anyway, so I think that's one thing that we need to address for our people living with disability consistently. And as tribes, we need to look at the barriers for our young people with disabilities and try to address that within our own systems as well, to provide, accommodations for our young people, especially if they're trying to promote our cultural ways and then support themselves while remaining with our communities. Some people have to move away to the city because they can't drive and they're out in the middle of nowhere and things like that. So, and then I would also say as a call to action is that any agency, I would recommend proactivity, but also do it with some substantial work towards anti-racism and towards cultural responsivity at the same time. Those are two separate things, but they are two very important needs when we try to collaborate with diverse communities.
Thank you. And taking just a minute each, Dr. Joseph, do you have any final thoughts on a call to action?
Yeah. I think maybe the most simplest thing is, you hear the saying, become an influencer, and use the space that you have to influence those around you in regards to these conversations and educate it. I think in this interview or this webinar, we used the term, the concept of double trauma. I think when we talk about double trauma, I think of it as double jeopardy, that, our people who are Native American are underrepresented, one, as a whole. And then when we think about the stigma around disability, that's another conversation of inequity, right? And so when we consider those two conversations, we really have to do much more work in raising awareness and understanding, but also I think said by everyone in this panel that from our indigenous communities, we were always inclusive. We always had a framework of peoplehood. The idea that every one of us had language, every one of us has ceremony, every one of us is connected to land. All of us have history. And so when we can find relationship in that, then we can do things like becoming an influencer in a humble way because we have commonalities, right? And so approaching it from a strength-based approach, I think, is always a good thing, and a good way to have these conversations, so that that you're always, the intent is to find that relationality. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. Just taking a few seconds, Sarah, any final thoughts on a call to action?
I would say for those folks in the audience with disabilities, don't be afraid. Go out, walk your walk, do your journey, live your vision, know that you can do anything, show your heart, know that I believe in you, we believe in you, and you can believe in yourself. Look to others and see how far we've come. Like for myself, I've been invited to the White House several times. I've been asked to be the chairperson, for example, of the Native American Caucus on the Iowa Democratic Party. So we can go as far as we dream it, and we can do anything we want. And I just would like to emphasize that. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. What powerful words. It goes right in line with what I'm about to say to close this section out. I would like to close the call to action with the wise words that I live by in all that I do. Cherokee Nation Historic Principal Chief Wilma Mankiller said, "The secret of our success is that we never, never give up." For everyone listening, we cannot give up. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Shay. I know we don't have time for Q&A. Do we?
We probably have about 1 minute for Q&A. This is Shay Tanis. I'm the PI on the State of the States and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and we are honored to have in partnership Black Feathers and work with Black Feathers out of our project. Very quickly, I am a white woman, brown hair, green eyes, gray shirt, and a white background, middle-aged. We do have one question. We've tried to answer some of those within the chat. The one that's up is we just came across this webinar a few minutes ago. How can we find a way to make those more available to others? We can go ahead and start to respond to that question. This webinar will be online via YouTube. You can go to blackfeathers.org to be able to see this live webinar or this live podcast, as well as our other podcasts. And I do want to go to one other answered question, certainly, which Donna was happy to respond to, but then I can kick it back to her very easily. Said, "Thank you for this excellent podcast today. Can you address the question of what barriers do you see for increasing representation on councils?" And I'll go ahead and hand that back to our colleagues at NACDD.
Great. Thank you, Shaya. I thought that was a great question. And something that I do want to share with everybody. First of all, some of you who are presenting today, as you certainly heard from Dr. Funmaker, she sits on her DD Council in her state. Every state and territory of our nation has a DD Council. As you heard from Dr. Funmaker, some of them are referred to as a board. The state of Wisconsin and the state of Virginia refer to theirs as the board for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But if you are looking to find out what's happening in your council and how you might have an opportunity to become engaged, please either Google the name of your state and DD Council, or come to our website at nacdd.org. We have a full list of every state council and your connection to reach out to them. I would look for several things on their website. You can see a list of all of the members of the DD Council. By law, the DD Council needs to have representation from all parts of the population within the state. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's more than one. And so I would bring forward a conversation with one of the staff people from your council or the chair of the council. You can get their contact information on the website and ask those questions. which tribes are currently represented? How many tribes are represented? What are the opportunities for either having somebody else sit in that seat at some point, or if that seat is currently full, what else can I do to bring forward more information as a member of my tribe, or maybe somebody, if you are involved in several tribes, or just have great information about tribal communities that you want to share. So I would really work on having that conversation, and please know that every DD council does have representation and encourages that representation. I also want you to know that even if you can't be in a position right now of serving on a DD council, all of their meetings are open to the public. So please do come, participate, be there for the meeting, listen and learn, and then that will help you to become known in the community as well, and to become active with that DD council. Are there any other questions that we can answer before we do a final close?
This is Shay Tanis. I think wonderfully someone asked for more resources that Dr. Joseph shared, and he gave a plethora of resources. Thank you for doing so within the chat. The ARC, the other you said, partners that we have, our network of AUCD is also one in which there is a number of different initiatives going on, as well as our project of national significance, the State of the States in Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. I want to go ahead and say thank you to everyone, certainly for your participation. It has been our honor to work with you, as well as our honor to work in partnership to create Black Feathers. So I will hand it over to Crystal or Shauna if they have anything else to say, and then back to Donna for our closing.
I would like to just thank all of the panelists for participating today, as well as those that were able to attend and the viewers yet to view, because we're going to make sure that this is spread far and wide. So thank you so much for following us on blackfeathers.org, and we look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to say thank you as well. And it's been an honor to be here and to hear from the panelists, and such powerful words and such a great call to action. So I look forward to talking with you all more.
And I want to add my thanks as well to Shay Tanis and the State of the States, and to Dr. Crystal Hernandez and Shauna Humphreys for agreeing to work with us at NACDD to put on this podcast. And I want to thank all of our incredible presenters today. And I want to close with something that Cody talked so beautifully about. You all addressed it, but Cody, you took on that last question of what actions can we take? And that's really where we want to get to at the end of this session today, is thinking about what's my role. We each have an individual role to play in moving forward this conversation about how can I weave together my story, my intersectional life of being somebody from a tribal nation, but also somebody who either has a disability, or maybe is related to somebody with a disability, or cares about with somebody with a disability. So how do I do that? And Cody, you gave us a few examples, and I just want to leave you thinking about a few others, which are, you can create your own podcast, you can create videos, you can write up your story. DD councils are always seeking stories. Send your stories to your state DD council. We also collect them and send them to the Administration for Community Living. They want to hear your stories as well. And post, whether it's on Facebook, it's on YouTube, or a site like The Mighty. If you're not familiar with The Mighty, it's a wonderful collection of individual stories about life with a disability, a chronic health condition, or just post your own. But please do share with your DD council, share with any of us. We're happy to collect and hear your stories, because your stories lead to actions, and those actions truly make a difference. I know at the close, an evaluation form is going to pop up on your screen. I believe it will also come to you since you are registered for this event. You'll get it that way as well. Please, I ask you, take a moment and fill out that evaluation. Your feedback helps us to do better in the future. But again, I want to thank all of our presenters today and amazing folks with Black Feathers. thank you all for being with us today during DD Awareness Month, DDAM. Thank you, everybody.